I'm going to talk a bit broader than procurement itself, not least to make the point, not readily understood inside government, by the way, that for construction, as indeed probably for most complex acquisitions, procurement isn't a brief slice of time. I have once in my career been asked to submit a proposition to a gas board, where I got given a sort of tick list chart, which included gas mantles as one line, and another one was the provision of professional services. And too often in government, they think that procurement is just this little operation, and there are whole teams of people who do it and do nothing else. But in construction, of course, it's part of a system that begins with identifying need and finishes with, we hope, an asset that does what it said on the tin. And it's therefore a much more complex process and influences far more things. So I'm going to draw on 3 years' experience of life within government. I've got the scars on my front and my back of that. Having spent 3 years doing that, as I say. And I'm going to begin with this portrait, which I used in the first talk I ever gave as Governor's Chief Construction Advisor. It's a terrific painting done by a Flemish architect called Lucas van Valkenburg. It was mid-16th century. It was a kind of an ironic statement, actually, on the expense being spent on St. Peter's in Rome. So discomfort with iconic architecture isn't new. And it's also superbly about construction. It's full of detail. And down the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see the contractor asking the client for more money, the QS standing by fully armed, as indeed he needs to be. And in case that's too much of a stereotype, I should say that my father was a contractor. So although I spent 40-odd years as a QS before government, until he died at the age of 93, I had the permanent reminder of what life was like in what he used to call the real world, as opposed to what I inherited. So beware stereotypes, but the real point. And by the way, there are words up here, read them if you haven't got time before they disappear again. They're on the tag you've got in your neck. The real point is the Tower of Babel. And it seems to me at some point in the history of the construction industry, we lost the ability to talk to each other in a sensible way. And so I set myself 2 ambitions at the beginning of my 3 years. One, gladly satisfied, was that the experiment should be regarded as sufficiently successful for there to be a successor, and I now have a successor in place, and good luck to him, but also to try and improve the quality of the conversation between industry and government, between this spectacularly fractious industry, of which we are all a proud part, and the only body, I guess, in the world that might be even more fractious, the good people of Westminster. And to try, therefore, to join together the two conversations that those two parties had to have with each other, which, when I started, were probably at a all-time low ebb. And a minister had been heard to say, before I joined, walking into a meeting with construction officials, to his senior civil servant, "Can you remind me why I'm seeing this bunch of whinges again?" It was almost that bad. And it seemed to me, therefore, it was worth doing something about that. As to what that conversation might be about, there were 2 big themes. My first day at the office, I chaired a meeting attended by Peter Mandelson, which is an interesting experience, and he threw down this challenge in that meeting about low-carbon construction, about which Minister Rabbit has also spoken. And worth saying that as I survived a change of government, that was enthusiastically picked up by the new Minister, Construction Minister, Mark Prisk. And when he arrived on his first day at work, he came and spoke to our steering group and said, "Carry on, I like what you're doing." Nonetheless, no denying the fact that with the change of government came a change of emphasis. Worth saying that although I worked with almost all government departments, certainly those with the big construction programme, I reported principally to 2 ministers, Francis Maude in the Cabinet Office, and originally Mark Prisk and latterly Michael Fallon on for business. And those 2 relationships were valuable and necessary, I would say, recognising that the government has these 3 roles in the industry. It's its regulator, which I stayed away from for obvious reasons. It's its major client, which is represented by the Cabinet Office, and it's also its sponsor, Department for Business. And balancing those things was an important part of the role. But suddenly it became really about money. And so we were caught in this difficult place as an industry between not enough cash and too much carbon, and how we could work those 2 things out over time. So I used to describe this as trying to ride 2 horses at once, these big issues of public procurement and sustainable construction. But Dennis Healey once memorably said, "If you can't ride 2 horses at once, what the hell are you doing in the bloody circus?" And for good or ill, I seemed to be in the circus by then. And so one set about that. And I have to say, it only got rougher thereafter, as money got tighter and carbon got more pronounced. One important point, though, and I think relevant for you if you're looking at this role, I never regarded it as part of my job to be a lobbyist. And it would have been fatal to be so. I think the industry kind of hoped that it would have somebody inside government permanently lobbying for it. If that was what you were known as inside government, you'd become powerless. And so all my lobbying was done in private. I don't think ministers ever knew how bad I thought things were. But to the outside world, I was never saying to the industry, yes, I'm going to go and tell them that and so on. And extending my contract that I was independent. I never made the mistake of asking the Permanent Secretary what that meant, because he would tell me always it didn't mean I was independent. But it also meant independent from industry. And that was hugely important so that you are trusted. Because the fundamental problem, and it's been mentioned already, is an absence of trust in the relationship. So if you just became one of them, whichever them that might be, the role becomes compromised. So there were three big things to do. One was carbon, one was the government's construction strategy, principally around procurement, and one was the whole issue of building information modelling. And I'd like to talk briefly about all three. But first of all, set some context. There is no doubt we're in a time of change. I think every age thinks it's a conceit that it thinks it's living through a period of great change, but I think we really are. And there are some huge pressures out there, the first of which is the financial turmoil in sort of 2007, 2008, and the world that led us into. Sorry, I went the wrong way. But the expression was left by the first Secretary of the Treasury to his successor at our change of government, which wouldn't have been funny even if it weren't true. And sadly it is. The projections made then, and it's got no better since, by the way, were that to get back to a level of borrowing formerly known as prudent, which is 40% of GDP, will take until about 2031. So a whole generation of excessive debt to work out. And I cannot overemphasize how powerfully that was said inside and thought driving things inside government. When I spoke to Treasury and said to them, the industry doesn't know how bad things are, almost invariably they would say, they don't know really how bad things are. There's something close to panic inside government. So we're not in a good place, to say the very least. And searching for paddles, which is, I hope, what your conference is about today. So debt, long-term debt, is going to remain a factor, I think. That means that we have to have a better offer as an industry, fundamentally. And we're out there searching for customers. And the second piece of context, really, which is equally important, is that if we don't find a way, others will. There are 300 million children in China learning English as a compulsory second language. And they're not doing that to make stuff that goes in Christmas crackers. They are growing the world. And so we're caught between a part of the world that will work, for very low wages and no health and safety and nothing else, a spectacularly low cost base, and actually a highly innovative emerging economy in the East. I would not have guessed if someone had said to me, draw me a Mongolian dairy farm, that it would look like that. So they are moving up the value chain. And for architects, and others will follow, of course, there must be some nervousness in seeing a Chinese architect win the Pritzker Prize. There is nothing that we do that they don't think they can do as well. So that changes all sorts of drivers. And the last thing about change is, of course, nobody likes it. And I guess I've learned anything over the last 3 years, after driving change from my own business, is actually how spectacularly difficult it is and how resisted it is on all fronts. And this industry, for the most part, has never faced the burning platform other industries have faced, of imports, driving new ways and methods of working without which you'd be wiped out. For the most part, construction remains a domestic business. So we haven't had that kind of burning platform, but we do now, because there is no money. We hear that over and over again. Nonetheless, government without money needs to build. The industry without work wants to build. It should be the basis for some kind of relationship. And I think in this market, certainly as we start to come out of the worst times and start to invest in ideas and people again, this is when market share is lost and won. So very quickly, low carbon, the Minister's talked about it already, but we have this Climate Change Act, which you may or may not know about, so a ticking time bomb that says that by 2050, as a matter of statute, we will get 80% out of our emissions for the whole of our economy. And about 40% of that is in construction. And for construction, it's even worse. The projections say that to make that 80% overall, construction, residences, for example, needs to go to zero. We need to build buildings and convert buildings so that they make no net addition to emissions to the environment. And as just one illustration of what a challenge that is, what the numbers are, there are 26 million homes in the UK. And we demolished them so slowly, there'll still be 25 million of those will still be with us by 2050. And there are 20 million minutes at the end of 2050. So you've got about 50 seconds a house to sort the problem out, which at the very least you would say is going to be a stretch for the industry. And probably what you would say, as I do, is there is no way we can get even close to that with an industry operating the way it's operated in the past. So in this way, the needs of no money and no carbon come together, I think. And we would have to work out, the industry must work out what the cycle of treatment is to get carbon out. And actually what a spectacular competitive advantage it is internationally if you can become an economy that knows how to do that. How do you produce a low-carbon economy? It cannot be done by government alone, and the expectation that we'll achieve this by shouting at politicians is madness. And one of the recommendations that came out of that report and has been picked up is the establishment of a Green Construction Board in the UK, chaired by a minister, with a co-chair from industry, looking at a plan to take that report that had a terrifying number of recommendations forward, and looking at the kind of reforms and the kind of processes that we need to make that work, and getting cash and carbon in some kind of sensible relationship to each other. Because there's no prize for getting rid of all the carbon if we bankrupt ourselves in the process. And as an aside, I'm 65 years old. I don't remember anybody saying as I grew up, stuff could run out. But that's a reality. All those sort of granite worktops that we have at home, we're excavating to the centre of the earth to find them. And that is a finite process too. So that sets some new challenges. The main thing, though, is the government construction strategy, and a much nicer saying than that one from Liam Byrne, which is we have to think our way out of this in a way that in the past we haven't. We've had a whole series of reports, some of which you will know about, no doubt, written by great worthies and so on. Most recently by Andrew Wolstenholme, who wrote a report called Never Waste a Good Crisis, which recognised that this might be a good time for change. So one of my proudest boasts to ministers, in my last meeting with Francis Ball, and presenting to the Cabinet Office Board, I said, I'm proud to say there's actually new thinking, anything that we're doing here. We have known for a long time what the problem is and how it is. What we're trying to do here is change it. So we're after an industry that's fit for its purpose. And one of these is me, by the way. We do kind of know how to do it. We've had this extraordinary success, which God knows we made enough of in the UK, great moment of celebration around the Olympics and so on. But I'm still not sure that we could do that. 6 days after a tsunami. My suspicion here is it wouldn't take us that long to do the risk analysis before we started any process and so on. So I think we can only do that with Photoshop in the UK, and you may be in much the same situation here. It's a reminder of how much people can do. So we need to raise the bar. John Armin assures me that this is a guy raising the bar. He looks to me as if he's hanging on for dear life. That may not be the case. So a good strategy has three things. Diagnoses the problem, starts to identify some treatments for that problem, and sets in place a plan for action. And that, I suppose, is fundamentally the difference between this strategy and many that have preceded it. Big problems are extraordinary fragmentation of the industry. Hello, how did that happen? Help? Speed? For those of you who missed it first time around. This map was produced for me when I did the IGT report, and it showed me that my stakeholders, so-called, and it's more complex than chemistry. And that is an obstruction to making progress. The only thing I've seen that's more complex than that is this, which I thought was a joke, but it isn't. This is a management consultant's plan for the governance of Afghanistan. Which maybe ain't going swimmingly well, but the serious point is complexity is an enemy of progress and change, because people can't get to grips with it. And the next and biggest problem is what I call the hierarchy problem. This is how we kind of give out work in the UK construction industry. You might recognise this as actually an equivalent to the euro. And see your proud position on this. So it might be more accurately therefore what we call the guano problem. Where we appoint a kind of god architect or engineer who cascades the work down to a few consultants and so on. Eventually, down on the guano, people actually do stuff, fix things, walls, floors, and ceilings, and make products. And that's where the money is. So a key driver of strategy is to get to those people. With all due respect to main contractors, if I give you £1, you probably keep 5 or 10 pence on a good day. I want to make real savings that get through you, past you, down to that. Our problem, of course, originates in the British class system. The idea that professionals had some special kind of standing and invested interest. Whenever I talked about reforming construction, I could see people's minds going not to would that be better for the client, but how does that affect my business model? And that's an enemy of progress too. So we start this wretched relay race that you all recognise, and at some stage somebody drops the baton. And I spent too much of my career mediating this problem, of the dislocation between information need and information provision. And none of my proudest moments as I die will be about arguments lost or won on this subject. They're about great buildings made, but otherwise might not have been made so well. So we have to get that out of our system. And my favourite illustration of this comes from Lake Ohio in the States, where there was a little dinghy called a regional contract. And his boat's called Change Order, and I'm guessing it's owned by a contractor. Just guessing. But those of you who make your living out of variation in change orders know that actually it's not really a very good route to prosperity. You may get your money back if you're lucky. And our final problem is that we just keep reinventing the wheel and getting it wrong. And all of that leads to waste. The water industry has been very slow to take up the advantages of IT. We seem to be slightly nervous in comparison with other industries. There's probably no industry that's so far made less advantage of IT and technology. All of that leads to great series of chasms in our value chain between design and management of construction, between the management of construction and the execution of the work, and between all of the above and the use of the asset, which is where real value lies. They should pull everything, but it doesn't. And as our final indignity, we hand everybody that doesn't work. So energy targets missed by typically 30 or 40%, and buildings are expensive and impossible to maintain. That builds aggression, adversarialism referred to by your Director General into the process. And interestingly, when I talked to a series of trade contractors about new ways of working, one of the concerns they expressed about partnering was just this, that we lose our knowledge of how to fight. Now, on the one hand, that would be a good thing, but you have to recognise that if that's how you make your living, you can't ask people to give that up. You have to change the drivers of it and get to where the money is. Fundamentally get to where the money is. Which is with people who do the work and people who make the product, I'll say again. And our system separates the client from that process. And that kills innovation. Absolutely outright. So if I can buy a car that knows when there's somebody behind me, brakes and know when they're about to lock, headlights and know when it's dark, windscreen wiper and know when it's wet, where's the equivalent of that in construction? So for our purposes, the industry is upside down. We're not getting to it. Ian Tyler, boss of our biggest contractor, Balfour, said this to me: you asked me to turn my business upside down. And what I replied to him was, I'm asking you what we need to do as a client to persuade you to turn part of your business upside down so we can get to the money. And he conceded that too much of the innovation at the moment in the industry is about winning a bid and establishing a market position rather than giving the client what he wants and innovating. And that lies, the answer to that lies in developing the supply chain. And there's a huge interest in politicians in small businesses because their electorate is full. And therefore a suspicion of big business to add the suspicion of the industry generally. We're trying to get away from opportunistic tendering to building genuine supply chains. And that lies at the heart of what we're doing. And get out the idea that you make your profit by gouging it out at the next tier in the supply chain now. That is built-in oppression. And you know it does. So we did a lot about fair payment. We used to have a charter, people break it, because you can actually get considered advantage by breaking the charter. We made it contractual, but still the trade contractors and suppliers didn't know whether their contract had that provision in it. So in the end, we moved increasingly towards project bank account. The default position in this company now is we'll pay the supplier if you work together, down to about tier 3. Let me just go through the bones of what the strategy actually set out to do. Firstly, we are publishing, and have done for 2 years, a pipeline of the work that's coming to give people sight of what it is, the skills that will be needed, and also the scale of investment that might be justified on the part of their own businesses. So that looks 2 years ahead. Stuff will still get cancelled. It's the scorpion and the frog, for those of you who know the parable. Politicians will cancel stuff. Nonetheless, it will now be transparent that they've done so, and that's valuable. Next, organising government as a client. Look at this on your memory stick. Basically, this shows the structure which I brought into being when I arrived, whereby, reporting direct to Cabinet Office ministers, I chaired a board that included all of the major spending departments in government as far as construction is concerned, and then developed programmes around that. And down the bottom there, a series of joint industry and government bodies. And we had a steering group chaired by the industry, Andrew Wilson, I already mentioned, now Chief Executive of Crossrail. But that gave us a very quick line to ministers. Without traction with ministers, there's no point in this job existing. You'd just be regarded as people who are taking care of that problem. And it was a very quick route. So to the extent that you can organise herding the cats, I think we've done the same fairly well, and try to join that conversation together at least. Government as a client and its major suppliers. We met routinely with our 30 major suppliers and with their supply chain. Nonetheless, the argument goes on, and it's incredibly difficult to deal with an industry which doesn't even agree with itself. I would say as an observation, I was amazed how often I organised meetings with the industry and a minister, where the industry used that opportunity to argue with itself in front of a minister. And I remember at least one minister saying to me after a meeting, well, that was bloody hopeless, wasn't it? You know, and the opportunity lost is extraordinary. Yet we can't stop arguing with each other, even when you get something teed up to make a point in the social, economic or environmental interest of the nation, which is what politicians for the most part are concerned about. So if we just shouting all the time, they can hear nothing. Nothing gets through. And another point worth making very quickly is that if you go and see a minister and you take with you the world's most perfect report on the future of the construction industry, when you leave the room, so does that report. Because behind you is somebody with another report and another report and another report. So you get one shot to make one big point where the minister says to his officials, I'm interested in that, follow it up for me. And I was generally surprised by the poor quality of lobbying by those whose job it was. They cannot, however, be a single voice. This is the diagram I did for my successor. I need to read it. That is all the interactions between government and construction. There were 37, I think, in total. So you cannot have all of those in one conversation, but you can organise them in a way. Bodies like this should be trying to mediate those conversations and know that the right conversations are being had across the whole piece. And an expression that Mark Chris was very fond of, which is, I can't have a single voice, but can I please at least have a harmonic choir? And as I say, I can't overestimate how important that is for the quality of our conversation in the industry. Next, worked on client skills. I think clients have to have three basic skills. And the first one is they should know how to lead themselves. Establish a major project leadership academy with Oxford University to train 350 civil servants in the leadership of major projects. And eventually the situation will be, if you haven't been through that academy, you can't lead a major project. It'll take a while, but it's on the way. Then I worked with the people, and if this had been a few years earlier, Steve's picture would have been on there right in the middle, the highways there. I then worked with the people who actually sat on my board, who were looking after the money day to day. It's the guys actually driving the programs. So they were in the process. And in what I call the Where's Todd phenomenon, they are made accountable for their projects. And every individual project has a name on it. You go to a government website and find out this project is the responsibility of this person. So that accountability starts to bite. And we built challenge into the process. And worth saying, I guess, that every 6 months I report to Francis Moore, department by department, red, green, and amber, are these people on track to produce a better result? And a red-rated department, and there was one, an amber-rated one, and there was consistently two, goes to the Secretary of State for that department. Again, without that kind of traction, no real progress. Next, if a client knows where value is made in their service. And we just don't want bad buildings. These are the first generation of PFI schools on the left, and what they're competing with on the right. And we just don't want to make bad buildings. The very miserable outcome of this recession, it will be left at the end of it, is lots of crap buildings. So we need value. And value, I'm not using these slides almost every talk I ever give them. Over the life of an office investment, for example, about 40% of the cost is building it. You put the people into play, everything else becomes irrelevant. What this slide says is, if you can improve the productivity of the people by about 6 or 7%, the building is free. And yet that drives practically nothing inside government. We don't have the equivalent of what happens in the commercial sector, which is that if you're staying at a Premier Inn, everything in that inn can be defrayed by an expense of £59 a night. And nothing not necessary to earn £59 a night is in there. So that should drive things. This is a hotel too. This is £600 a night. And this is a hotel, although my personal theory is this was designed to take the piss out of lift engineers. You've got to say at some point, we have reached a level of rationality. And so we must understand that design is made on value is made on drawing boards, not on building sites. But it's also where a lot of it's pissed away again. By over-design or by inefficiency. Getting that out, that waste out, and getting to a building site which I would call good and good enough. We want buildings that do the job. But in that top, we were building schools in that top triangle, that orange triangle. If you're building up there, you're actually not producing value for the taxpayer, you're just building less. And remember, again, politicians, we have 100,000 people living on the streets of the UK, and we have a waiting list of 4 million for houses. They're really not fascinated in the conversation about the final details of the design. Good enough. Finally, a good client should know what they should be paying for their job. I worked in the commercial property sector mostly. I worked with Stuart Lipton, some of you may know, for 20 years. He never rang me up and asked what a building was going to cost. He rang me up and told me what it had to cost. And so you have to know that. When we benchmark, now every government department is required to benchmark its output. When we benchmarked schools, extraordinary, and we found that schools costing 3 times as much as others. And they were not 3 times as good, and I'll lay money that they're costing 3 times as much as one half. So instantly, we had an average of about 2,400 square metres, and you could see a whole bunch around 1,800, 1,700. So we targeted about 1,500, and that's what's now going on. You should know what you should be paying. And Francis Moore's challenge for everybody was, I want 15 to 20% out of the cost of construction by the end of this Parliament in real terms. So every department's been required to publish a trajectory of how it will reduce its costs over time. I have a thing I call the Joni Mitchell School of Procurement, which is kind of comes out partnering. We all hold hands, light candles, it's all going to be fine. And I don't think it is. There needs to be some tension in the process. But it has to be intelligent tension. And we've seen in the Olympics, what competition pulls out of people. It needs to be intelligent competition there. And the benchmarking finally protects you against suicide bidding. If you don't know what something's going to cost, what do you do with a bid that's way off the wall? And you have to start rejecting stuff that you just don't think they're going to know, unless you can understand it. So all of that's a benchmark. Now I'll skip a few here because of time, and talk about procurement and what I want from procurement, because Steve has a detail of it. Fundamentally want integration. We are moving to a position inside the UK government where we do not hire contractors and designers separately. We want an integrated offer. We say to the industry, not how much is concrete, but show me your best school, show me your best hospital, show me what's answer to this problem. And to start fixing these fractures in our value chain. And we want to recreate the unity of success which we all know as a team. So that means long-term relationships, that means frameworks. There are no bigger enemies of frameworks than contracting. Because once you've got a framework, more people not on it than on it. And there was constant lobbying to ministers against frameworks. I had to acknowledge there's some pretty rickety ones out there, and the response was not to get rid of them, but to start identifying good versus bad. Read this on your memory stick. Some of them were very long term, where they were unbanded by value, so if you couldn't do a £100 million budget, you couldn't get £1 million, so on. Slowly working out, getting more intelligent frameworks. But in my time, we never give up on value in long-term relationships. Finally, I don't think you can fix the industry from the outside. You can't reach in under the bonnet to fix it. It has to fix itself. One exception to this that we operate on has been where in 2010 I stood up without total ministerial cover, to be honest, and announced that BIM was going to be mandated on government projects by 2016, 5 years and a 5-year programme. And it caused huge excitement. And it also, by the way, moved the UK to a position of nowhere, up to kind of about third in the world in terms of the level of speed of adoption and putting information on. Which politicians like, because we were starting to take a leadership position. And one of the great gurus like BIM said he'd never seen such fast uptake. And the global chairman of HOK and Building Smart, the agency that looks after this, said the same thing. And Doug Oakley, chairman of HS2, said that he was really quite excited about it. I'm 65, as I've already said, I'm excited about it too. I never found something which so much makes me wish I could start my career again. But this goes against one of the great trajectories of life, as you all know. For the most part, you care about something a bit less as life goes on. So BIM is a big and exciting thing. But for government, what it's fundamentally about is a wooden horse through reform. So we've made every department sit down and look at its processes. This is the Ministry of Justice, our Pathfinder department, looking at this with the processes it uses. And it was finding extraordinary waste away, I think. Things it just did not any longer know why it didn't, which come out. 3 months out of the procurement process, and a lot of money out as well. Simplified pre-qualification and so on. Doing the same thing on auditing of accounts. Firms being asked over and over again to get their accounts audited every time at a cost and so on. So produce a route map, a process map there. 4 departments now have done this, and all 3 will be through by the end of next year. And then they start to procure in this way, and fundamentally work out the information issue, which the DG talked about, the gap, the gap between what you actually need to build a job and when you need it, so that you work your way through the process and hand over at the end a job that does the thing. And that is, you know that at the end of every bill of quantities it calls for record drawings and operating manuals. That is the response to that request for a hospital. So what huge comfort it must be to the manager of the hospital to know that when he's got a problem, it's somewhere in that box. So the real interest for them, for government, is that managing the assets, getting that information electronically so you can find it. And this is being used, as I say, to pull fundamental reform. It will drive integration and so on. And we are now trialling projects. And the first project done by the MOJ, every department is spending about $1 million organising itself to do this, and the government is spending about $1 million a year helping the industry respond to that. MOJ is convinced to get all its money back on its first bid before we started building. This will lead to new business models, and this is my close. You know, and new forms of cooperation. I think we are going to see real change, and as I say, I was born in the industry, and I've never felt it so near and so real. When you can start talking straight from design into manufacture. Why would you buy a door handle if you can buy a door with a handle on it? Why would you buy a door if you can buy a door set? Why would you buy a door set if you buy a wall with a door in it? So we will start increasingly to see components and products as we get down to the industry and describe our problem in terms of what you need as opposed to what they should give you. This will bring big reform in the industry. And as I've already said on schools, this is already seriously working. You know, the industry, on an integrated basis, is now offering the government answers to its schools problem at a price that is 40% less than spent over the last government, and using BIM to do it. And that bottom essential one, if you give the headmaster of that school a morning, if he gives you a morning, at the end of it you give him at lunchtime a design, a price, and a 3-year running cost. Who would want to do it the old way when that's for sale? Too often the response from professionals to that is it's flat pack. So my final warning is IKEA are still with us, and Habitat have gone. And something that made a big impression on me in my own working life, not one single manufacturer of radio valves went into making transistors. They were too busy making a better radio valve. And I guess ask you to pause whether that's what your business is doing at the moment. So, killer apps. For me, I couldn't find a picture of killer apps, so here's some killer apes instead. These are the things: collaboration, integration, innovation. And my test now of any idea for reform, and particularly around procurement, is does it bring these 3 things into play in a way that drives down costs, not by attacking margin, but by attacking basic cost? Does it do so on a basis that assures value for money? Thank you.